Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being here. Dave just confirmed with what I phone call, there's bad traffic out here, so we may have some people wandering in. I don't know what Little Rock usually doesn't have a traffic jam, so but we have one tonight, so I don't know. I guess it's the weather. Danny Brassell is been known as America's leading reading ambassador. He became personally inspired, and I love this story, when he learned that by the age of 30, Teddy Roosevelt had read 20,000 books. And that inspired him to pursue reading and to pursue champion reading for others. He earned his doctorate from the University of Southern California. He's been teaching at California State. Prior to teaching at the higher education level, he taught and tutored students from pre-K through 12. He's the author of 10 books. He's a well-known speaker, and some of his books, by the way, are very humorous, which I happened to get a copy of one tonight. Very humorous. But his goal, and he fosters a lifelong commitment to reading and to learning. So please welcome Danny to the Clinton School, and we're honored to have him here.
Thank you so much, Skip. I appreciate it. Thank you all, and I really want to thank everybody for coming tonight, braving the weather and braving those big Little Rock traffic jams. I'm from Los Angeles, so I don't know about that. So I always like to get to know who everybody is in the room. So everybody turn to the attractive person beside you right now. If you see a person look at you and look away, you ain't looking so hot this evening. And repeat after me. It's a pleasure to sit beside you. You're looking sharp this evening. Everybody give that person a fist bump right now. No matter what you do, remember you are always a teacher and a role model. So now you're wondering, who is this guy? Well, again, like Skip said, my name is Danny Brassell, and I'm on a mission to bring joy back into education. I've actually taught all age levels, from preschoolers all the way up to rocket scientists. I can make that claim because I used to teach English as a second language to engineering students at the University of Southern California. I became a teacher because of the movie Stand and Deliver. Raise your hand if you ever saw the movie Stand and Deliver. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's a true story of Jaime Escalante going to Garfield High School in East Los Angeles to teach AP Calculus. So I said, I'm going to be Jaime Escalante. So I was originally hired to teach 12th grade social studies in Compton, California. It's a community in South Central Los Angeles. And they switched me from working with high school students to middle school students to upper elementary to lower elementary to pretty soon, instead of preparing students for college, I was coming home with snot marks on my pants every single day. The first thing I learned is what works with a 12th grader does not necessarily work with a kindergartner. But what works with a kindergartner works with all age levels. The second thing I learned was perseverance. How many of you have ever been in a negative environment surrounded by negative people telling you what you couldn't do all the time? I mean, one of my old principals, Mrs. Lucifer, she used to come into my classroom every single day with her foreboding clipboard and her permascowl, and she used to write me up for everything she thought I was doing wrong. She was killing me. But I had a guardian angel. I was blessed. I taught at a school where I was the only man at my school. I was also the only white person at my school. I taught with predominantly elderly African-American women from the South who all had been teaching for at least 20 years. Well, my mentor was Mrs. Turner. Mrs. Turner had been teaching for 40 years. Mrs. Turner believed in two things: discipline and the Bible. When her little ones got out of line, she started reading aloud Revelations to them. And it was Mrs. Turner who taught me a system on how to bring joy into my classroom, and so hopefully I'll be able to impart some of her wisdom during our limited time together this evening. So by the end of this presentation, I want you to walk away with your head held up high in the sky. I want you to leave here feeling refreshed. I want you to leave here feeling like you can tackle any challenges that you may be presented with throughout your day. Are you excited for tonight? All right, I'm going to get you pumped up for reading. Also, I'm going to make sure all of you get a complimentary copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed. It's a book, I actually wrote it for a principal who didn't know how to engage his faculty, so I said, okay, I'll write you a book. And so every week I give you a concept, I give you an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book all of you should read, but you're too lazy because you're adults. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation that you can read in 5 minutes or less. If you don't, if you can also always get something, I can send it to you electronically because I know we have a live audience. If anybody just emails me via my website, DannyBrassell.com, I'll make sure everybody, also the viewing public, also gets an electronic copy of that. My last name is really easy to remember how to spell, folks. It's spelled like Brassell. No, I never took any grief over that as a child, and I want to make sure to keep you pumped up. Tonight's great, but I'll send you an email a week to keep you in a positive focus because we got too many people in a negative state of mind nowadays. I'm going to make America laugh again if it kills everybody. I mean, we need to get everybody smiling again a lot more. So are you ready? Yes. All right. Hang on. Raise your hand if you'd like to learn how to get kids to read more. Well, I know the secret. Reading should always be fun. Human beings are pleasure-oriented creatures. I'll give you an example. I was finishing dinner with my wife one night, and she's like, honey, you want some more green beans? I said, oh, honey, I'm stuffed. She said, we got chocolate cake for dessert. I said, just a small slice. You always find room for things that you like. I know I'm in a good classroom when the kids don't pop out of their seats when the bell rings because they want to finish whatever it is that they're reading. That is a good reading teacher. Now, you have to understand, struggling readers are not illiterate, but they'd benefit greatly from your teaching assistant. So I thought I'd share with you a traumatic story from my childhood about reading bedtime stories with my mother. Now, my mom and I used to always read this book together that started out Once Upon a Time, fairly straightforward, except I didn't see the O, because the O was a weird shape. It was in a black box, and it had all these vines around it. And so Mom would say, okay, Danny, read to me. I'd go, Once upon a time. She's like, no, Danny, that word says once. Say once. I'm like, once. She's like, again. Once upon a time. She's like, no, Danny, that word says once. Say once twice. I'm like, once. She's like, again. Once upon a time. She's like, you never learn anything. They're going to put you in special ed. She always got me crying before I went to bed. Well, one day a buddy of mine came over to my house to play. And for some reason, I took out this book. I guess I wanted to impress him with my reading skills. And I go, Once upon a time. He's like, hey, nincompoop, you see that black box with a weird shape with the vines around it? That's an O, silly. That word says once. I looked at him like, once upon a time. This is something I always tell teachers. Sometimes we're trying 38 strategies with a kid, and we're ignoring one of the single greatest resources at our disposal. Other kids. Kids and adults think differently. I've known this ever since I was a kid. When I was in kindergarten, Sister Rosanna asked if all of us wanted to go to heaven. And all of us raised our hands except for Hector. She's like, you don't want to go to heaven, Hector? And Hector's like, oh, I thought you were talking about today. He's right. He's just looking at her question from a totally different point of view. That's right. I was a struggling and reluctant reader. It's my specialty now. It's ironic. I love working with struggling and reluctant readers. Can I give you a tip? 4 out of 5 struggling and reluctant readers are going to be boys. Boys and girls are very different. Girls will read books about boys. Little boys will not read books about little girls. I mean, there's some exceptions out there. I was with a teacher, a 3rd grade teacher. She's like, oh, Mario won't read nothing. I'm like, oh, I'll get Mario reading within an hour. I was actually wrong. It only took 20 minutes. In the book I handed Mario, he liked it so much he memorized the first chapter by the next week. The book I handed Mario is called Just Disgusting by Andy Griffiths, not the Sheriff of Mayberry. He's an Australian author. He wrote The Day My Butt Went Psycho. And I don't remember, the first chapter is the 101 most disgusting things. I don't remember all of them, but it was like number 12, dog poop. Number 13, stepping in dog poop. Number 14, trying to wipe the dog poop off your shoe and getting it on your fingers. Number 15, eating a hot dog that tastes like dog poop. Number 16, realizing the hot dog tastes like dog poop because you forgot to wash your hands. That's how you get a little boy excited about reading. I mean, don't get me wrong, folks. I mean, I think Little Women is a wonderful book, but if you want a little boy to read it, you better put diarrhea in the title. All right, so tonight I'm going to share with you the ABCs of getting kids excited about reading. Why ABCs? Because of the psychological rule of 7 plus or minus 2. Harvard did a study By the way, whenever I cite research, I always say Harvard did the study. It sounds much more legitimate that way. So Harvard did a study. They found the typical human being can store 7 pieces of information in their short-term memory, plus or minus 2 pieces of information. So I'm going to teach us our ABCs about reading. The A stands for access. I'm going to show you how to give kids lots of access to wonderful reading materials to get those kids excited about reading. The B stands for the business of reading. We're going to talk about how to take care of business, to teach kids how to read. And the C stands for culture. How are we creating a culture to get kids excited about reading all the time? All right. So that's a whole lot of different stuff. Everybody take a deep breath in. Take a deep breath out. All right. Let's start off with access. Here's a riddle for you. What was your favorite textbook as a child? If you're trying to answer this question, there's something deeply wrong with you. And, well, was it civics or grammar? It drives me nuts, the emphasis on textbooks in this country. For the price of a brand new textbook, I could buy 15 Scholastic books that would actually get a kid excited about reading. I mean, one of my old principals, Dr. Lecter, used to ask me if I was using my textbook, and I can honestly say yes, because they make great doorstops. But they're not a good way to get kids excited about reading. Why is that important? I can't tell you how many 7th grade boys I've worked with. There is no way I'm getting this kid to read this textbook. But if I give him a manual on how to fix a Chevy, he'll memorize it from cover to cover. Because he's interested. You have to understand this, folks. It's only reading when we choose to do it for ourselves. Happiest day of my life, besides my wedding day, was when I got my PhD. My wife's like, "Why are you so happy?" I'm like, "Because from now on, I pick out the books." And that's what reading is. I mean, and you have to make sure to give kids lots of different reading materials. I mean, have lots of different books. I mean, have big books and little books and scratch and sniff and pop-up books. But guess what? Some people don't like books. So have lots of magazines for kids, Sports Illustrated, National Geographic, highlights. When I was a kid, the only thing I liked to do was eat. You got a kid like that, give them a menu. They'll read that. You know, newspapers. I was a journalist before I was a teacher. I mean, I always taught in the inner city. Show me a McDonald's in the hood that doesn't have at least 5 free newspaper stands out front. I used to teach my kids how to snag those newspapers, and now I actually have a way of influencing the home reading environment as well. Comic books. I'll do corporate trainings with executives in their suits, and I always ask them, what was your favorite book as a child? 70% of the audience. Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Batman. Trading cards. I can't tell you how many little boys, the way I got them hooked on reading was starting off with Cam Newton or Peyton Manning's football card. Leapfrog makes me feel like an old guy. I wish the books talked when I was a kid. I think Leapfrog's fantastic. Get multilingual books. Kids like to hear different languages. I used to work at a preschool in downtown Los Angeles that served homeless Latino students. And one day we get this huge donation of books in Italian. Now, none of us spoke Italian, but I can decode Italian. So every afternoon I used to read to the kids, "Vivi, vivi, vivi." Some of the kids, it was their favorite time of the day. You know, get reference books. Every class I've ever taught, I have at least one boy who's an aspiring Cliff Clavin who likes to give me useless information every single day. You know, "Miss Brassell, the capital of Vermont is Montpelier." Great, Rogelio. Can you give me some more useless information tomorrow? Okay. Give that kid an almanac. There's a great episode of Friends where Joey wants to look intelligent, but he can't afford an entire set of encyclopedias, so he just buys the letter V. Give the kid an encyclopedia. The most important thing, though, about access is you need to make sure to give the kids lots of choices. Now, Carol Ann Tomlinson said, if a student has a spark, or better still, a fire, a curiosity about a topic, learning is more likely for that student. Too many kids look at school like it's prison. What is going on in America, folks? My kindergartners used to go to bed with their backpacks on. My 8th graders were thinking of ways to get sick. What happened in those 8 years to get that kid to hate school so much? I mean, if I'm doing my job, my kids should be banging on my door at 6 in the morning. They're so excited to get into school. And they should be in tears when that final bell rings. You know, it was Carl Jung who said, if there's anything we wish to change in the child, we should first examine it and see whether it's not something that could be better changed in ourselves. Our job as parents and teachers is to open up those minds and plant seeds that foster a lifelong love and growth of learning. So Harvard actually did a study on this. An informal survey of elementary age students found they are most interested in, multiple choice, would you say A, conjugating verbs, B, balancing a complex chemical equation, C, the Pythagorean theorem, or D, dinosaurs and volcanoes? What do you think? Discuss amongst yourselves. What do you think? All right. May I give you my answer? Yes. Okay. It depends. A good teacher could make any of these subjects interesting. And a bad teacher could make dinosaurs and volcanoes boring. My 9th grade science teacher, Mrs. Newman, she could make dinosaurs and volcanoes boring because the woman never changed the tone of her voice. Hello, class, and welcome to the exciting world of life science. The school is burning down as I speak. I have a large laceration above my left eyebrow. I'm slowly bleeding to death. Your presentation matters. I've seen teachers take a totally cool book. Time to read aloud again. Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak. That sounds more depressing than a James Taylor song. And I've seen teachers take the telephone book. Domino's Pizza 555-8787. Your enthusiasm is contagious. And so the second part of Access, you need to make sure to find things that are engaging and interest your students. That leads to the third part of Access, which you need to make sure to give the kids lots of opportunities to read. I want you to remember this. Minutes matter. I'm going to show you some frightening statistics. Actually, they're pretty awesome statistics. So there was a great study by Harvard back in the late 1980s. It's been replicated over 8 times in national surveys of students. They wanted to see how much reading kids are spending outside of school. What they found is that kids that test in the 20th percentile spend less than a minute a day outside of school reading for fun. That didn't really surprise anybody. Here's what surprised a lot of people. Kids in the 70th percentile spent less than 10 minutes a day. Wait a second. Parents, you're saying if I can get my kid to go from 0 to 10 minutes a day, I can get the kid from an F to a C? Actually, I'm going to show you something even more extraordinary. The kids in the 90th percentile average 21 minutes a day. 21 minutes. Can you find 21 minutes to get your kid from failing to acing? That's my job, is to help you find those 21 minutes every single day. And that's why I created a program. It's called readingmultiplier.com, where every single day for 67 consecutive days, I train parents how to get their kids excited about reading. Every day I give you a video, 5 to 7 minute video, show you how to get the kid excited about reading, and that's going to get that kid excited about reading. The more excited you are to read, the more likely you are to read. The more you read, the better you get. Now, I've always thought that the best educators are reflective educators, and I want you to get to know each other anyway. And so we're going to do a tweet or tell. So for the next 23 seconds with the people at your tables, I want you to tweet or tell which of these 3 parts of fostering access you're going to make a priority when you lead the presentation tonight. Your 23 seconds begins now. So talk amongst yourselves. It's not a Catholic church, so you can speak out loud. That's fine. Okay, so now let's get into the business of reading. I'm going to give you a frightening statistic. If students don't learn to read by the end of 3rd grade, there's less than a 25% chance of them catching up. Folks, I'm a big believer in an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. You do not want to play catch up. We need to get these kids young. Jacqueline knows what I talk about because she used to work in early education. So I always tell this to people, learning to read is like learning to ride a bike. It becomes easier with experience, and we know experience leads to confidence. Well, that sounds simple enough. Remember this. People who say that's easy should be severely beaten. Anything is easy once you know how to do it. It's the getting to know how to do it that's the trick. So people always ask me, why don't people read? Well, there's 2 reasons. First of all, there's a condition known as illiteracy, which means they can't read. But there's also a condition known as alliteracy, which means they won't read. Both are paralyzing, but I'm going to argue to you this evening, I don't really believe there is such a thing as illiteracy. I believe there's just different degrees of literacy. I mean, yes, there are some illiterate people out there. Most of these people usually wind up getting jobs, working for road crews. And you'll find a lot of these road crews working out in front of our public schools. And these road crews make it very difficult for the rest of us to try and figure out the messages that they're trying to communicate. Now, if you can't work for a road crew, you can always get a job working for the federal government, creating a program like this one. Illiterate, just write for free help. I believe this program is administered by FEMA. Most people have varying degrees of literacy. For example, what does this mean? Good. A lot of people in Los Angeles, where I live, fail to recognize that. How about this one? Yeah, it means good parking spot. Yeah. My own 3 children, before they could walk or talk, we have over 300 DVDs in my house. My kids knew exactly which one was Finding Nemo. Didn't matter where I put it, they could find it. Children, from the time they are in the womb, can identify this symbol. Stop the car! Can I give you the secret to living a longer life? Okay. Turn off the TV news tonight and read a funny children's book. I can already tell you what's on the news tonight. The world is coming to an end, and whoever the president is doing a bad job. It's been the same negative news for the last 100 years. Read a funny children's book. You'll impress your friends. Yeah, I read a book cover to cover last night. Really? What was it about? It's about this little red hen. You always got to make reading fun. Let kids read where they want, when they want, whenever they want. I said that just now. You may quote me. And if you don't know what kids like to read, I know a wonderful website you can go to. My website, lazyreaders.com. If you subscribe, it's a free subscription. Once a month for the rest of your life, I update it with 10 book recommendations, 3 or 4 adult level, 3 or 4 young adult level, and 3 or 4 children's level books, all under 250 pages, so you have something you can read when you're stuck in waiting for an appointment or something. The most important part of taking care of business, though, is you gotta make it fun. So would you like to know the secret to teaching reading? Okay. Comes to us from a professor at Harvard by the name of Howard Gardner. Attractive man. He's available, ladies. I hear he's quite the party guy. Well, back in the mid-1980s, Howie wrote a book where he described 7 multiple intelligences. And about 20 years ago, he wrote another book where he described 2 new intelligences, so we could charge another $20 for that book. While Gardner's multiple intelligence theory is important, he actually stole most of his ideas from a more important educational philosopher of the late 1970s by the name of Gary Coleman. Gary Coleman said this: teachers, all you got to remember is this: different strokes for different folks. Everybody say that. Every kid is different. This is what makes teachers' jobs so difficult. 33 kids usually means 33 totally different types of learners in that classroom. You have to understand, one size does not fit all. Every class I've ever taught has a Yesenia and a Jose. Let's say you're teaching 3rd grade this year. You're not teaching 3rd grade. You're teaching anywhere from 7th grade to caveman. Every class I've ever taught, Yesenia shows up a half an hour early every single day. Hello, Mr. Brassell. I rearranged the desk and I thought of a way you could integrate social studies with science. And I just did my math homework for the next 5 years. And then there's Jose. Jose shows up 10 minutes late to class every single day holding his pencil like he just discovered fire. Pencil! Pencil! And in my experience, Yesenia usually gets transferred out of my class within 3 weeks, and Jose never misses a day of school, which is fine. I became a teacher for Jose, not Yesenia. She's going to do fine with or without me, but I can actually have a real impact on Jose. But actually, Yesenia needs me too, just in a very different way. I think one of the silliest things we strive for in American education is equality. Kids don't need to be treated equally. They need to be treated fairly. Some kids don't need a lot of help. Some kids need a lot of extra help. It's almost as ridiculous as the reading wars. I've been in higher education now for over 20 years, and they're still debating on how do you teach a kid how to read. You got people over here believe the way you teach a kid how to read is alligator, ball, cat, because that's the way we all speak, right? Then you got the people over here. Okay, Sarah, I want you to take this book home, put it under your pillow, and when you wake up, you'll know how to read. And I'm being facetious because we know if you want to learn how to read, knowing the sounds of the blends is somewhat helpful, isn't it? It certainly is. And if you want to learn how to read, having opportunities to read for fun is helpful, isn't it? It certainly is, but we know we need a balanced approach. But as a teacher, I've learned this. If I got a kid who loves doing phonics worksheets, what should I do? Give them phonics worksheets. If I got a kid who loves reading in the corner, what should I do? Let her read in the corner. School is built for them, not for me. I'm not a big hooked on phonics guy because I stuttered as a child. They were trying to get me hooked off phonics. I'm like, ball. They're like, no, it's just ball. All right? But I've taught some kids how to read using a phonics-based approach, something I always think. I have a teaching philosophy. You keep them moving, you keep them playing, that keeps them happy. When kids are happy, that's when they're learning because they don't even realize that they're learning. So the second part of taking care of business is you have to accommodate your instruction based on the needs of every single student that you have. And that leads to the third type of business, which is to get help. Can I give you the most helpful teaching tool I know of to help a kid love reading? All right. Use poetry. Any class I've ever taught, whether they're little ones or older ones, I read aloud at least 4 poems a day to my students. Think about that. It takes me less than 5 minutes a day. Over the course of 180 school days, I've exposed that child to over 700 poems. I used to mandate all of my students have to memorize at least 20 poems. Heck, when I taught kindergartners, on Thursdays they became poems. It's a great way to differentiate instruction. So I have like a Jose, my non-reader, he'd be like, "Hi, I'm the Sitter by Shel Silverstein. Mrs. McTwitter, the babysitter, I think she's a little bit crazy. She thinks a babysitter's supposed to sit upon the baby." Then I got Yesenia, one of my top students. She's like, "Hi, I'm Mark Antony from Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is often tear with their bones. So let it be with Caesar. He was my friend, loyal and just to me. But Brutus is an honorable man." 6-year-old girl memorized 50 lines from Julius Caesar. Where did I get that idea? Kindergarten Cop. You ever see the movie Kindergarten Cop? In that movie, Schwarzenegger got the kids to memorize the Gettysburg Address and got me thinking, I wonder if that's possible. I'm convinced if I was a better teacher, I could teach calculus to kids, little kids. The reason I've taught every grade level, but my passion now is with the little ones. Why? Because they don't know what they can't do yet. They're amazing. So we're going to read some poems right now. We'll start with the nursery rhyme. We'll do it together. 1, 2, ready, go. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. And all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Okay, now we're going to do a tongue twister. 1, 2, ready, go. A fly and a flea flew up and a flew. Said the fly to the flea, "What shall we do?" "Let's fly," said the flea. "Let's flee," said the fly. So they fluttered and flew up a flaw in the flue. I always tell my little ones, you have the rest of your lives to be miserable. This year we're laughing. I like funny poems, so I love people like Broad Baggart, Jack Prelutsky. My favorite of all time, though, is Shel Silverstein. So let's read aloud My Beard. 1, 2, ready, go. My beard grows down to my toes. I never wears no clothes. I wraps my hair around my bear and down the road I goes. I always like to expose kids to the classics. I actually never learned Roman numerals as a child, so let's read aloud Emily Dickinson's famous XXVII. 1, 2, ready, go. I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us, don't tell. They'd banish us, you know. How dreary to be somebody, how public like a frog, to tell your name the livelong day to an admiring bog. This is actually one of the first poems I exposed my students to, because if you read this poem, this woman had some serious self-esteem issues, wouldn't you agree? A lot of people don't know this. Emily Dickinson died without ever showing a poem to anybody. They found her poems in the attic. This woman had no idea how much her poetry would mean to millions of readers. I look at my kids every day. All of you have poetry inside of you. It's your responsibility to share it with the world. So again, I've always thought the best educators, the best parents are constantly reflecting on their practices. So I'm going to give you 23 seconds to do a tweet or tell with the people at your tables. Which of these 3 parts of taking care of business can you make your priority this year? Your 23 seconds begins now. Okay, so why don't we wrap up with how to create a culture of reading in our homes and in our classrooms. The building blocks of success are parents. Schools need the parents' help. Children are just a reflection of their parents. This is something I always tell teachers. We got to repeat after me. Everybody repeat after me. Parents' friend. By the way, it's 2017. Parent means different things in different homes. Some kids have no mommy. Some kids have 2 mommies. Some kids are being raised by a foster mommy or an auntie or an older sibling. Whoever the authority figure is at home, that's the parent. Teachers need to do a better job of doing whatever it takes to get that person on their side. I'll go to school districts for 2 days. I'll work with the teachers on day 1. I'll work with the administrators on day 2. But on the evening of day 1, I work with the parents, because I think you need all 3 of those players on the same team. That's how you start moving mountains. Every single parent seminar I've ever conducted, I've pointed this out. 24/7, 365, 8,760. There are 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year equals 8,760 hours in a year. 6, 5, 180, 1,080. There are 6 hours in a typical school day, 5 days a week, 180 days a year, equals 1,080 hours in a typical school year. Subtract 1,080 from 8,760, and you get 7,680 hours the child is with the parent, not the teacher. Who's the problem? That's not the way I say it to parents, by the way. Here's what I say to parents. No matter what I do as your kid's teacher, you are 7 times more important than me. Have any of you ever seen the movie Jerry Maguire? Help me help you. If he doesn't learn how to read, he's spending the rest of his life living with you, not with me. We need to be on the same team. And so the first part of creating a culture is you need to get schools and homes working together. That is critical. I used to always tell my teachers, I said, you know what, I'm looking for thermostats, not thermometers. What's the difference? Thermometers take the temperature. Thermostats set the temperature. What kind of climate are we creating to get those kids to love reading every single day? Raise your hand if you've ever had one of those days. Raise your hand if you ever need to get pumped up. Raise your hand if you ever felt overwhelmed. Again, let me help you. So I'm going to make sure all of you get a copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed. If you don't get a physical copy, just email me via my website, DannyBrassell.com, and I'll make sure you get an electronic copy so you can read it. And I also have everything on the readingmultiplier.com to get those parents excited about reading. So a lot of people I'll have people ask me, well, how should I reward my kid for reading? First thing I always recommend is candy. Kids love candy. If that doesn't work, give them soda, preferably something highly caffeinated. If that doesn't work, pizza is a wonderful tool. And if that doesn't work, I find $20 to $50 is a great way to get a kid excited about reading. I'm being facetious. Kids ain't stupid. They know if you have to bribe them to do something, it's not worth doing on its own. I love that Pizza Hut has the Book It program, but if I ever meet the CEO of Pizza Hut, I would make a suggestion. The way that program works right now is kids read books and they get rewarded with pizza. If I ran the program, it would be exactly the opposite. Every time a kid went into Pizza Hut and had some pizza, I'd reward him with a book. You're sending a different message to the kid every single day. So why don't we make reading the reward? Hey, we do a good job, I'll do an extra read aloud later on. We'll read under the table later. We'll read like penguins. Our job is to get those kids excited about reading. Also, I don't know if you know this, there's a wonderful government agency. In almost every community, they got these buildings. In these buildings are rows and rows of books. Get this. All you have to do is apply for a card. They'll let you take the books home for free. They're called public libraries, and they're the pride of any community. And so the second part of creating a reading culture is to actually make reading the reward for all of us. And that leads to the third part of culture, which to me is the most critical thing we should be doing all the time, which is reading aloud to kids. You know, my friend and mentor, Jim Trelease, has the single greatest book I've ever read on reading, besides my own books. It's called The Read Aloud Handbook. He doesn't need me pushing it. It's one of the best-selling education books of all time. The first half of the book gives you all the research on why reading aloud is the single best way to improve kids' reading ability. And the second half of the book goes grade level by grade level summaries of the best books to read aloud to kids. It's an invaluable resource. You know, now, I know teachers aren't supposed to have favorite students, but I actually had a favorite student. I've spent the majority of my career teaching in the South Central area of Los Angeles to students, but I did teach in Houston, Texas for a little while. I taught third grade, and I had a little boy named Howard, and Howard's still my favorite student of all time. Howard was the son of a Baptist minister, and Howard's father spoke like Martin Luther King Jr., which meant Howard spoke like Martin Luther King Jr. And so one day I was reading a book to the kids called Stuart Little by this guy named E.B. White. Write his name down. He's going to be big someday. E.B. White. And so after I read to the kids, I always have the kids applaud the author. So the kids are applauding one day, and one little boy, Deshaun's sitting there, and he's like, I like Stuart because he's little. And Howard stands up in front of the class and like, don't you get it? Don't you get it? We all be little. We all be little. But we be big someday, like Mr. B. And he pointed at me, and I realized this child could lead a revolt. And Howard's the reason I became a teacher. I loved his unbridled enthusiasm. It's what got me out of bed every single morning, and I worried to death for Howard, because next year he was getting Miss Hampton. And Miss Hampton was going to misinterpret his enthusiasm as a discipline problem, because Miss Hampton is a direct descendant of Darth Vader. And Howard taught me one of the best lessons ever. Never give a kid an answer you're not doing them any favors. Give them a strategy, because sooner or later, all of us are going to have a Miss Hampton to deal with. And so the best strategy I know to get those kids excited about reading is you need to show that passion every single day. Charlie Tremendous Jones once said, "You're the same today as you will be in 5 years, except for two things: the people you meet and the books that you read." It's really critical that we get kids to make the right choices and surround themselves with lots of positive influences. And most importantly, they need to be reading lots of great positive things all the time. I'm going to end tonight with something the same way I used to end with my students. I used to always end class looking at my students and saying, remember this: education is valuable, but it's execution that's priceless. Knowledge ain't power. Only applied knowledge is power. Or, as my pastor always likes to say, I don't expect you to try everything I just suggested, folks, but for goodness sakes, please try something. Translation: let's foster a love of reading in everyone. Remember, folks, you make a difference each and every day. Enjoy the journey ahead of you. Thank you for joining me tonight. And now we can do question and answer. Nick? Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you for that. We do have time for some questions. Raise your hand. We'll get a mic to you. Raven?
Great. Raven?
Yes.
Oops, sorry.
We're very fancy. We all have mics here.
I love it.
Yeah.
For all 10,000 people in the audience.
The millions that are
Yes.
here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Peter Sell. Yes, Raven.
Good evening. First of all, thank you so much for
Thank you.
that awesome presentation. I'm so pumped to take some of your strategies back to my students. Throughout your work in America, have you seen any literacy programs that have just stood out to you? And if so, where was the program and how was it executed?
So there's no one program that's going to solve, except for the ones I list in my books, that's going to work for every kid. Everybody wants to sell you a product. Again, Jim Trelease says if reading aloud cost $129, every parent in America would rush out and buy it. And if we found out kids didn't like it, they would mandate it in the public school system. Everybody thinks that there has to be one magic bullet, but really, I'll tell you, Raven, my secret is find out what the kid's interested in. I was very blessed. Have any of you ever read a book by Will Hobbs? He's one of the best-selling young adult authors in the world. He writes a lot of books, outdoor adventures that are popular with teenage boys. Well, he was my 7th grade reading teacher before he was a best-selling author in Durango, Colorado. And Will had 5,000 books in his classroom. And every day at the beginning of class, he would tell us what he was reading. We would tell him what we were reading. And the rest of the 50-minute period, we read. Whenever we finished a book, we'd go up to Mr. Hobbs. He'd put down the book he was reading, look through our book, ask us 3 or 4 questions. If he was satisfied with our answers, he gave us a point. Every book up to 200 pages was worth 1 point. Every extra 100 pages was worth another point. You needed 25 points to get an A, and the top 5 point totals had their names written on the board. And I wanted my name written on that board. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne, 500-page book, 4-point book. Also an excellent Disney film starring James Mason and Kirk Douglas. I didn't really feel like reading a 500-page book, so I took the book up to Mr. Hobbs. He asked me 4 questions, and I learned a valuable lesson that day. Books ain't always like the movies. And Mr. Hobbs gave me the 4 points. That's when I learned a great teaching strategy. Guilt works, because I read every word of every page of every book from that point forward. Wound up with 44 points, went well above and beyond what I had to do. He used the single greatest teaching strategy I've ever seen a teacher use to get a kid excited about reading. May I share it with you, Raven? He found out what I was interested in, which was football. And at least once a week, he'd come up to me. He's like, "Hey, Danny, check out this book on John Elway. I know you'll like it." What are the odds I open up that book? In my experience with all age levels, 100%. Kid might not read it, but they're going to open it. Also in my experience, by the 4th time I've done that with a kid, they're going to start trying to read that book, because there is nothing more powerful than somebody significant in your life, a teacher, a coach, a pastor, a parent, an older sibling, a buddy, saying, "You know what? I was thinking of you when I was reading this." So the best program I know is a steady diet of reading aloud to kids every single day. And when you read aloud, folks, understand that 1st graders can read aloud first grade books on their own. They can't read 10th grade books. You have to read them 10th grade level books. There's a great holiday called Read Across America in March to celebrate Dr. Seuss's birthday. And it drives me nuts because you have all these adults go to elementary schools and they read aloud Dr. Seuss books to kids. If you ever look at a Dr. Seuss book, in the upper right-hand corner, there's the Cat in the Hat, and it says, "I can read it all by myself." That's meant for the child, not for the adults, you know? Kids can read. The first book I used to read to my kindergartners every year is The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. The first book I used to read to my 12th grader was Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss. I wanted to send a clear message to people from day one. Great literature has no age level. Anybody can appreciate a really good story. And so I know that you work a lot with secondary students, Raven. Really one of my best tricks was when I was a middle school teacher. I was the only middle school teacher at my school never to have tardies. And it's because I started every single class with a great book, The Rest of the Story by Paul Harvey. I grew up listening to Paul Harvey on the radio. He passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 325 years old. He was, but every day at 12:15, he used to come on the radio saying, "I'm Paul Harvey with the rest of the story." And there's about 4 of these books. They're all out of print, but you can still get them on Amazon, and each of them has 101 rest of the stories, and they're perfect 5-minute read-alouds that my students love. If you don't want to do that, there's a great podcast right now done by Mike Rowe. He's the guy that did the show Dirtiest Jobs, and his podcast is called The Way I Heard It, and he has that type of Paul Harvey story, but it's with more contemporary people. Which is great. I mean, I get the kids. I mean, I still read to classes all the time. So I was in New York City a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of people don't know this. New York City, before it was called New York City, was called New Amsterdam because the Dutch settled there first. Well, back in 1664, the British were trying to take over the entire eastern seaboard, and so the British invaded New Amsterdam, and the Dutch surrendered without firing a shot. And so the British pretty soon started making fun of the Dutch, and pretty soon everything negative in society became Dutch. And some of those expressions have lasted in our language for over 350 years. So for example, when you go Dutch on a date, it means you're both paying. I'll be a Dutch man's uncle is not a nice thing to say to a person. A Dutch wife meant she was a prostitute. Dutch courage meant you were drunk. But there's one thing the British used to say to the Dutch, which infuriated them. You know how every ethnic group has a type of food that we like to associate with that ethnic group? Well, the Dutch really like cheese. And so the British started calling the Dutch John Cheese. And this made the Dutch so angry, they started calling the British John Cheese in Dutch. Yankees. You know, Yankees. And that is the rest of the story. Oh, I love Paul Harvey. So that would be my suggestion for you. Did that answer? There's no such thing as a short answer with me. I apologize. Yep, there we go.
Donna LeBlanc, and I work with the Literacy Action, and we are in, a group of us are in the Hawkins Women's Prison.
Wow.
And the reentry. So this is new for me. We're doing the
Thank you for your service, Donna. That's fantastic.
It's wild.
Very rewarding, though.
But my question is how, these women have not been read to, and they're young. Mm-hmm. They're young. And we've got challenger books everywhere from grade 2, 3 up to 7, 8. And we do vocabulary and all that. I mean, I don't know. We've given them books.
So, Donna, I actually have a firsthand experience. I used to volunteer at a juvenile detention facility for teenage girls, and they wouldn't read anything. And the way I got them hooked on reading is there's in Us Magazine, in the back of Us Magazine, there's this thing called the Fashion Police, where they have all these comedians that rip apart celebrity outfits, and these girls couldn't get enough of that. They started reading like crazy to see all the different taunts, and that's what got them hooked. You have to find out, though, what's going to get a kid interested. I always tell this to people. The little boy that reads Captain Underpants is going to be a better reader than the little boy that's not reading anything. It might not be Shakespeare, but you got to give them that gateway drug to get them interested in that. And so you find out what they're interested in. Good teachers and good parents eavesdrop. If you hear your kid talking about NASCAR, get some NASCAR books. If they're talking about J-Lo, get a biography on Jennifer Lopez. You got to be constantly paying attention to what they're interested. I mean, I had a boy, Kiara, I taught second grade. His first grade teacher told me, "Kiara don't know nothing." Thanks. Well, Kiara, who don't know nothing, came into my room one day. He's like, "Hey, Miss Brassell, you see Barkley last night? He had 18 points, 16 boards." I'm like, "Thank you, Kiara." From that day forward, after lunch every day, he'd sit on my lap. We'd read the LA Times sports page. By the end of the year, one of my top readers, and all Kiara ever read about was basketball. So you get them hooked on, find out what they're interested in. For teachers at my school, I started a book club at my school, so it was me and all women, and so we'd all read Mary Higgins Clark books, and then we graduated up to Sidney Sheldon. But that was a great signal for the kids because they saw us actually talking about books, and so they became interested in them. So these are the types of things. Sometimes and read aloud sections of a book to them. So, thank you, Donna. Another long-winded answer. I apologize.
Over here.
Yes, sir.
I volunteer at elementary school, and the teacher has assigned to me a boy who, in the 3rd grade who is, she says, reading at a 1st grade level. Now, I've been working with them with flashcards and words. And from what you're saying, that may not be as effective as if I worked with him with a very elementary book and had him try to read it aloud.
What's your name?
Right? Pardon?
What is your name?
David Miller.
Thank you, David. So one thing I would actually suggest to the teacher is when that 3rd grader is not with you, David, is I would send the 3rd grader down to kindergarten to tutor a kindergartner, because one of the best ways to help kids is to make them the more competent peer. And I used to do this with 5th grade teachers. I'm like, give me your biggest discipline problems and send them down to kindergarten, and I'll have them work with the kindergartners. And 2 things happened. They were no longer discipline problems, and they became better readers because you just made them the more competent peer. The way you really learn is by teaching something to somebody else. And so even if he's reading at a 1st grade level, one of the things when I used to tutor, I tutored high school students that had scholarships to Division I colleges, but they were in danger of being academically ineligible. So I had this one guy who was, he's 6'11", 295 pounds, had a full ride scholarship to a major Division I university as an offensive lineman, but he was reading at a 1st grade level. And they gave me 6 months to get him academically eligible. Well, the books written for 1st graders are about bunny rabbits and duckies. 12th graders aren't interested in bunny rabbits and duckies, but that was what he could read, was that kind of level. And so what I told him, I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to write a book for a 1st grade class, and we're going to read it to that 1st grade class. I'm like, do you know what 1st graders like to read? He's like, no. I'm like, well, why don't we read a whole bunch of 1st grade level books, and we'll figure out what kind of book to write. Do you see what I just did? Now he has permission to read 1st grade level books in front of his buddies and say, oh, it's because I'm writing a 1st grade level book. And I got him up in 6 months. We got up to about a 6th grade level, and then he worked. Once he got to the university, they had excellent tutors with him as well. But you have to find something that gets that kid interested. And so, don't get me wrong on this, David. If the flashcards are working, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But a lot of kids, that's not going to work. And so I'm always on the lookout. Well, what might work? Maybe. I know boys that they can't read sight words like from and read, but they can read diarrhea, they can read barf, and that shows me it's because they're not interested in what they're reading. So I have to find them something that they'd be more interested in. So just a suggestion for you, David. Cool, thank you.
You got one? You got Rachel? No? I've got one, and I'm not sure if you have the study handy that Harvard did on it or not, but kind of the difference in new technologies and reading on a tablet, reading out loud, listening to podcasts. You're all ingesting things, but there's kind of differences in these. Yeah, so one thing you all have to know is that books on tape count. Being read aloud to is just as good as reading on your own. I mean, I could cure road rage in America tomorrow. I'd give everybody a book on tape. Sometimes I drive 8 blocks out of my way because I want to finish a chapter because I'm listening to a podcast or a book on tape. Nick is bringing up a really good point. I get that question all the time: is real books or e-books? And my answer is yes. Whatever works for you. I mean, I love physical books. I just love them. And this is horrible, but I write in them all the time. I mean, I like physical books. My wife is exactly the opposite. She can't live without her Kindle. But I can give you all kinds of arguments for a Kindle. My wife's from Singapore, and so we go back to Singapore every other year, and it's about a 20-hour flight. I'm bringing 20 pounds of books. She's bringing a half-pound Kindle that has access to every book on the planet. Secondly,
It drives her nuts because at night I have to turn on my lamp beside me to read my book. She doesn't have to do that because her Kindle lights itself up. And then third, I'm getting kind of old, and it's very difficult for me to read some words. She never has that problem because on the Kindle, you can adjust the font size. So there's all kinds of benefits to having that kind of technology. There's this misconception out there that people don't read much, and I would argue till I'm blue in the face on that one. I think people are reading a lot more. It's just in different types of formats nowadays. I think we're a very well-read culture. I mean, you can't walk 100 feet without seeing 20 different types of billboards on sidewalks and newspaper stands and physically. There's all kinds of environmental print. I see people that are reading their phones all the time. You know, I often call them vidiots. They don't know what to do without a video screen in front of them. But I think we need to embrace technology, not fear it. But I'm a little old-fashioned. I still love the old-fashioned books as well. Nick.
Well, Danny, thank you so much for coming back to Arkansas. Thank all of you for coming out.
Thank you, and
thank
thank you to the viewing audience right now. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.